The wind moaned through the wooden slats of a longhouse buried under snow, its song older than memory itself. Inside, the hearth burned low, a single orange ember fighting the endless Arctic dark. Outside, the world was frozen silence. Inside, the Vikings dreamed, but not of gold, conquest, or blood. No, during the months when the sun refused to rise, they dreamed of something far more fragile, the promise of spring, the warmth of family, and the gods who might listen in the cold. Tonight's story drifts into that dreamscape where myth, memory, and longing become one. What did the Norsemen see when their eyes closed against the endless winter? You're about to find out. So if you love wandering into forgotten ages, if you find comfort in old fires and quiet tales, make sure to subscribe, settle in, and let the past whisper you to sleep.
In the shadowed northern coast of Norway, around the 9th century, the winters stretched 9 months, and for most of that time, darkness ruled. The sea was frozen, the ships anchored like bones in ice. Villages huddled beneath mountains, their people surviving on dried fish, smoked meat, and memory. In these months, time itself seemed to stop. There were no raids, no trading voyages, no sun to mark the day. Instead, there were stories. Their words turned frozen nights into glowing worlds. Around the hearth, children leaned forward, eyes wide, while old warriors stared into the fire as if it held the face of someone they'd de-lost long ago. Among them sat a man named Erik, called Erik the Dreamer. He was no king, no warrior, but a fisherman who had once sailed beyond the Western Isles and claimed to have seen lands where the sky burned green, even at night. Now in his age, he spoke less of voyages and more of visions. The gods, he would whisper, speak to us when the world falls silent. That is why they gave us winter. And so, as storms howled outside, he told tales of what he saw when he dreamed. He spoke of a bridge made of frost and light bifrost, the path between worlds and of souls who crossed it when their time came. He spoke of Valkyries riding through the snowstorm, their armor glinting like shards of moonlight. But not all dreams were glorious. Some were heavy with sorrow. When one, he said, he walked through a field of endless twilight, where every step he took broke a layer of thin ice. As beneath it, he could see faces, warriors, friends, even his mother floating below, whispering his name. When he reached out, they vanished. Dreams, Erik would say, are not gifts. They are tests. Odin sends them to see what we fear most. As the nights deepened, the longhouse became a world of its own half memory, half myth. The women spun wool by the dim light of oil lamps, weaving patterns said to keep evil spirits from entering. The men carved runes on driftwood, hoping to please unseen gods. Even the children, restless and pale, began to dream strange things, wolves made of smoke, rivers that sang, and stars that spoke their names. Outside, the snow buried everything. Graves, fences, roads all disappeared beneath white silence. Only the mountains stood unbent, their dark crowns cutting through the low gray sky. The Vikings believed those mountains were alive. Ancient beings that remembered every life, every storm, every secret ever whispered beneath them. They watch us, Erik once said, and when we die, we return to their stone hearts. That is why they never fall. But even mountains dream, he told them one night. He claimed that on certain nights, if the wind was still and the stars burned low, the mountains whispered back, not in words but in feelings, in echoes of what they had seen. The rise of heroes, the fall of kings, the laughter of lovers long gone. And sometimes, if you listened closely, they would tell you your own future. But beware, he warned. To hear what the mountains whisper is to know the weight of time itself. Then came the night when the dream changed. A strange stillness fell over the fjord. The aurora did not dance. The sea did not breathe. Even the dogs refused to bark. That night, Erik dreamed again. He saw a figure standing on a frozen lake, wrapped in a cloak of ravens. The figure held a single burning candle. The flame did not flicker. "Who are you?" Erik asked. And the figure replied, "I am the memory of those who wait." When he awoke, he could still smell smoke in the air, though the fire had long died out. For the rest of that winter, Erik stopped telling stories. He sat by the fire, staring at the door as though waiting for someone or something to arrive. The villagers whispered that the gods had spoken to him, or worse, that his soul had wandered too far in the night and could not find its way back. When the spring thaw finally came, the ice broke with a sound like thunder. Rick rose, walked to the mountain path, and vanished into the mist. Some say he went to seek the voice that called to him. Others say he became part of the stone. And from that year on, whenever a storm rolled down the mountains, the people swore they could hear him in the wind Erik, the dreamer telling stories not to men, but to the mountains themselves. When the villagers spoke of Erik's disappearance, they did so in hushed tones, as though even his name might summon the storm. Months had passed since he vanished into the fog, yet the memory of that final night lingered like smoke trapped in the beams of the longhouse. The mountains still loomed above, cold and ancient, but something had shifted. The children swore they heard footsteps on the frozen ridge when no man dared climb. The elders left small offerings of bread and mead at the mountain's base, not for the gods, but for the dreamer who had walked into legend. And though spring light returned, warming the earth and waking the rivers, the people carried winter inside them still. Far to the north, where even the traders from Iceland seldom ventured, the nights were longer and the silence deeper. In one such settlement, a scattering of huts along a black fjord, a woman named Salvig tended her hearth alone. Her husband had sailed west years ago and never returned. Every night, she listened to the sea for his voice. But what she heard instead were whispers, soft, distant, almost human. They came from the mountains behind her home, like a chorus buried beneath stone. At first, she thought it was wind. Then, one night, she recognized a name. Erik, the dreamer. Salvig was no stranger to strange things. Her grandmother had been known as a Sirisa of Volva, of those women said, to walk between the worlds of men and gods. Salvig had inherited little of her power, but all of her curiosity. So one night, she took a lantern, wrapped herself in furs, and began the climb toward the high ridge. Snow fell in slow, whispering sheets, catching the light like drifting ash. The higher she went, the quieter the world became. Even the sea vanished below her, replaced by the heartbeat of the earth beneath her boots. Halfway up, she found footprints, faint, half-buried, but human. They led to a small hollow between two great stones. Inside, she found something impossible. Small wooden carving, still warm, as if it had been held moments ago. It was shaped like a man hooded, with a staff end on its chest, carved in runes. It was one word, Vaka, to the Old Norse that meant watch or wake. Salvig turned the figure in her hands, and for a moment she thought she heard breathing behind her. But when she turned, there was only mist. That night, she dreamed of Erik. He stood by the frozen lake from his story, the candle burning in his hand. But this time, he was not alone. Behind him stood hundreds of others, men, women, children, each holding a small flame. They did not speak. They only watched her. When she woke, her lantern was still burning, though she had never lit it. Days passed, and Salvig could not shake the feeling that something was calling her back to the mountain. The other villagers noticed her absence from the gatherings, her silence at the fires. Some said the old gods had chosen her. Others said madness had. Yet when she spoke of the whispers, the footprints, the dream, no one laughed. For deep down, they remembered Erik's words. The gods speak when the world falls silent. As the next winter approached, the first storm rolled down the mountains with a sound like roaring waves. The fjord froze solid, and the wind carved strange shapes into the ice. One morning, a child found another carving outside Salvig's home, this one shaped like a raven, wings spread, its beak pointing west. The villagers took it as a sign. Ravens, after all, were the messengers of Odin. That night, Salvig sat by her fire, the two carvings side by side, the raven, the man, watch and wake. Her mind drifted with the snow until she was no longer sure if she was dreaming. She saw Erik again, standing at the edge of a cliff that fell away into endless night. "You heard them too," he said softly. "The mountains remember." She wanted to ask what they remembered, but her voice would not come. The wind answered instead. "They remember us," it said. "All who have ever waited for the light." When Salvig woke, the fire was dead, and the carvings were gone. Outside, the first true blizzard of the season had begun. By dawn, her house was buried. The villagers dug for 3 days before finding the door half open. Snow drifted in like ghostly sand. Solveig was gone. Only her footprints remained, leading up the same path Erik had taken years before. And from that winter onward, the whispers grew louder. Travelers said they could hear 2 voices in the wind now, weaving through the howls and creaks of the ice. One low and steady, one light and sad. Together they spoke in the rhythm of the old sagas of gods who dreamed of men, and men who dreamed of gods. In the dark months that followed, the villagers began leaving letters at the mountains, base scraps of parchment, birch bark, even carved stones. Messages to the dead, to lost lovers, to the gods themselves. And when the snow melted, some of those letters were gone. In their place were tiny runes scratched into the earth. No one could read them all, but one message returned again and again. We are awake. To the Vikings, dreams were not illusions. They were another kind of life. And in the far north, where winter lasted forever, that other life often felt closer than the waking one. By the time the 3rd winter came after Solveig's disappearance, the settlement by the fjord had changed in quiet, uncanny ways. The people still worked, fished, and prayed, but they spoke less, as though afraid their words might drift too far into the wind and be overheard. Children were told not to stray near the mountains at dusk, for that was when the air listened. Yet even fear became part of their rhythm, like breathing in frost. Life in the north had always meant living beside mystery spirits in the sea, faces in the flame, omens in the flight of birds. But now it felt as if the mystery had drawn closer, crouching just beyond the hearthlight. In those days lived an old skald named Bjorn Halftongue, so called because he had bitten off a piece of his own tongue in battle long ago. He was the last of the great storytellers, a man whose voice had carried through mead halls from Iceland to Jutland. But age had dimmed his memory, and now his songs came slower, his eyes clouded like winter glass. Still, when he spoke, the villagers listened, for it was said Bjorn once traveled with Erik the Dreamer, long before the darkness took him. One night, as the first heavy snow began to fall, Bjorn asked for a fire to be lit in the longhouse. "There are stories," he rasped, "that must be spoken while the mountains wake." The villagers gathered, hesitant, yet hungry for the warmth of words. The flames flickered across faces tired from cold and fear. Bjorn began to hum, low and steady, an old chant used to summon memory. Then he spoke of Erik not as the man who vanished, but as the man who dreamed before vanishing. "Erik told me once," Bjorn said, "that every dream we have is borrowed. The gods dream first, and we are their echo." He paused, his one good eye gleaming in the light. "But sometimes a mortal dream is strong enough that even the gods must listen. Those are the dreams that bend the world." He told them that during one voyage to the western seas, Erik had a dream that changed his heart. He saw a world of green plains and endless summer, a land with no hunger, no frost, no war. He believed it was a vision of the afterlife, but when he awoke, he was surrounded by fog so thick he couldn't see his own ship's bow. For days he drifted in that fog, guided only by the cries of unseen birds. When the fog finally lifted, he saw an island that no map recorded. There he found a single black stone, shaped like a sleeping man. On its surface, faint runes glowed just for a moment, then faded. They read, "Dream forward," the villagers murmured. Some crossed themselves in fear. Bjorn nodded, his voice softening. "That is what he told me. The gods do not always speak in thunder and lightning. Sometimes they whisper through stone." After that night, Bjorn's health began to fade. He stopped leaving his hut, speaking only in fragments of song. But before he died, he carved a rune onto his doorframe, the same one Erik had described. It was shaped like 2 crossing paths, one leading upward, one down. When they buried him, the wind howled so violently that the grave soil turned to ice before it settled. Spring never came properly that year. The snows melted, but the sky stayed gray. Heavy with what the old ones called the waiting storm, the younger villagers began to dream more vividly than ever before. Some dreamed of standing in fields of blue light. Others saw shapes in the snow riders made of mist or ships made of stars. The dreams came so often that they began to speak of them openly. And in each dream, someone Erik, Solveig, or perhaps the gods themselves spoke the same phrase. "Keep watch." the waking comes. One night, a young boy named Leif, who had been mute since birth, awoke screaming. When his mother rushed to him, he pointed toward the mountains. They're calling, he said, the first words he had ever spoken. Outside, the wind had died. Stars burned still and low, like eyes. His mother whispered a prayer to Odin, but Leif only shook his head. Not Odin, he said. It's the ones who wait. The next day he was gone. His footprints led straight from the hut to the ridge above the fjord, the same path Erik and Solveig had taken. The villagers searched for 3 days but found nothing. Only a circle of stones at the summit, newly arranged. Inside the circle lay a raven feather and a child's carved toy, a wooden ship half buried in snow. That spring, the thaw came suddenly and violently. The ice cracked, sending waves crashing against the fjord walls. Trees bent under the weight of meltwater, and the air filled with the roar of rivers waking from long sleep. The people said it sounded like 1,000 voices rising all at once. And when the storm passed, the sky cleared to a color no one had ever seen before, neither blue nor green, but something between. The aurora returned, brighter than in living memory, dancing over the mountains like living fire. From then on, travelers who came through the region told strange tales. They spoke of hearing songs in the wind that no human throat could make, of seeing shapes in the aurora faces, wings, hands reaching upward. One monk from Ireland wrote that he had felt a pulse beneath the earth, like the breathing of a god. Others dismissed it as northern superstition, yet the people who lived there knew better. The mountains were awake again. That summer, when the sun finally dipped below the horizon for the first time, the villagers lit a great fire at the mountain's base. They called it the Watchfire, in honor of those who had gone before the dreamer. The Cirrus and the boy. The flames rose high, their sparks vanishing into the cold, endless night. And in that firelight, for just a heartbeat, someone swore they saw 3 figures standing on the ridge. A man with a candle, a woman with a raven, and a child holding a ship. Then they were gone. But the wind carried their voices still. When the watchfire burned, it was said that even the gods turned their gaze northward. For 7 nights the flames climbed higher, never dimming, even when the snow fell heavy and wet. The villagers took turns tending the blaze, feeding it with driftwood, pitch, the bones of old ships long since rotted. They believed that as long as the fire burned, the spirits of Erik, Solveig, and the boy Leif would keep watch over them. But on the 8th night, when dawn should have returned, the fire vanished without a sound. Not a wisp of smoke, not a spark left behind, only a single rune scorched into the ground where the fire had stood. It was one the villagers had never seen before, to mirrored curves, like eyes open wide. In the days that followed, something strange began to stir in the fjord. The fish returned earlier than expected, the ice melted faster, and the air smelled faintly of flowers, though none had yet bloomed. Some said it was a blessing from the gods, others a warning. The oldest among them, a woman named Astrid, claimed she'd seen this once before, in her childhood, a spring that came too soon, followed by a storm that took half her village. The mountains, remember, she whispered. And when they wake too early, men must listen. That night, Astrid dreamed she stood at the mouth of the fjord. The sea was calm, black as polished stone. Then, beneath the surface, she saw light soft, golden, like lanterns moving in procession. Shapes drifted below, walking through the water as though it were air. Their faces were pale, peaceful, and familiar. When one turned toward her, she recognized him. Erik, his eyes glowed faintly blue, like the heart of winter fire. He raised his hand, pointing behind her. Astrid turned and saw the mountains opening like doors, revealing a world of light within. "Come," he said. "It's time to wake." She awoke trembling, her breath misting in the cold air. Word of Astrid's dream spread quickly. Some mocked her, but others felt the truth of it deep in their bones. The next evening, a group of young men decided to climb to the ridge to see if anything stirred beyond it. Among them was one named Olaf, a shipwright sunbrave, restless, and foolishly curious. He carried a small iron blade and a lantern, thinking that courage and fire could keep old ghosts at bay. The villagers watched as he and 3 others disappeared into the gray light, swallowed by snow and mist. They never came back. Days turned into weeks. Then, during one stormy night, a loud crack echoed from the mountain. The next morning, the villagers found a great slab of stone had split near the ridge. Carved into the exposed face were runes fresh, sharp, as though newly chiseled. Astrid was the only one who could read a few. Her lips moved slowly as she traced the lines.
Oh.
"Those who walk too soon," she whispered, "will forget the warmth." She looked up, eyes hollow. They were warned. That summer the land grew wilder. Flowers bloomed where no seeds had been planted, and the rivers ran with a strange shimmer beneath the surface. The people began to hear music in the wind, faint and sad, like voices singing from somewhere beneath the ground. Astrid said the barrier between the waking and dreaming worlds had thinned, that the mountains were no longer asleep. The dreams of gods were seeping into the hearts of men. One night, a hunter named Thorvald returned from the woods pale as death. He said he had seen a figure in the trees tall, cloaked, and carrying a staff tipped with burning blue light. The figure had spoken without moving its mouth, the words ringing directly inside his skull. "Dream forward," it said, the same phrase carved on Erik's stone. When he blinked, the figure was gone. But where it had stood, the snow glowed faintly, as if from embers buried deep below. The next day, Thorvald left the village without a word, took only his axe and a bundle of dried fish. Some believed he had gone mad, others that he was chosen. A week later, a shepherd found strange tracks near the foothills' bare footprints, half melted into the snow, glowing faintly in the dark. The villagers followed them for a time, but stopped when the air grew to still. Somewhere above, a sound like slow breathing filled the valley. It wasn't the wind. As months passed, the line between dream and waking began to blur for everyone. People began to lose track of time. Days stretched endlessly. Nights felt no different. Some villagers reported seeing stars moving across the sky in patterned circles, spirals, and runes. Astrid claimed the gods were writing messages for those who still dared to look up. "They're telling us," she said, "that the end of sleep is near." Then, one night, a storm unlike any before swept through the fjord. The wind screamed like 1,000 voices, and lightning danced over the mountains like veins of fire. In the heart of the storm, a sound deeper than thunder rolled, a voice so vast it shook the snow from the cliffs. No one could understand the words, but everyone felt them in their bones. When the storm cleared, the fjord was silent again. The next morning, the villagers awoke to find the sea completely frozen, solid, gleaming, perfect, stretching all the way to the horizon. In its surface were reflections not of themselves, but of others, pale faces looking back, calm and waiting. Astrid stood at the edge of the ice, her breath misting in the cold dawn. "They've opened the dream," she said softly, "and now we must walk it." No one moved, no one spoke. But deep inside, every soul in that valley knew that something had shifted forever. The world they had known, the world of flesh, fire, and hunger, had begun to slip away, replaced by something vast, ancient, and patient.
Ow.
The dream had become real. And above it all, the mountains whispered again, their voices now clear as song, "We are awake." The morning after the sea turned to glass, the world seemed caught between breaths. No waves broke upon the shore. No gulls called from above. The ice stretched toward the horizon like a mirror to the heavens, reflecting a sky bruised with violet and pale gold. The villagers stood silent, listening for something, perhaps for the world to start moving again. None dared step onto the frozen sea, though it called to them in ways words could not explain. For 3 days, no one slept. Even the old, whose bones ached for rest, lay awake staring at the ceiling beams of their homes, hearing faint murmurs from beneath the floorboards. It was as if the earth itself whispered lullabies in a forgotten tongue. Those who did drift into sleep awoke screaming, claiming they had fallen through the ice into a world of light. One man, a blacksmith named Gunnar, clawed at his own arms in terror, saying he saw his reflection smiling at him but with someone else's eyes. Astrid gathered what strength she had left and called the villagers together in the longhouse. The fire crackled weakly, giving off no heat. She looked older now. Years had carved themselves into her face since the storm, but her eyes still burned bright with understanding. "The gods are not punishing us," she said. "They are remembering themselves through us. The dreams we have are not ours anymore. They are theirs." A young woman stood, clutching a bundle in her arms. "Then what are we to do, wise mother?" Astrid turned her gaze toward the doorway, where the faint glow of the frozen sea shimmered. "We go to them," she said, before the dream closes again. At dawn, a group of 11 villagers gathered at the shoreline. They carried no weapons, no food-only lanterns, rune-carved charms, and courage. The ice made no sound beneath their boots, smooth and unyielding. The reflection of the sky shifted as they walked, and at times it seemed that the heavens above and below had become one. As they ventured farther, the horizon began to bend. Shapes appeared in the ice, shadows that moved, though nothing else stirred. Some swore they saw faces, calm, ancient, watching. The air grew colder, not biting, but numbing, like slipping into deep water. Then came the sound. Faint at first, like distant horns, growing louder, deeper, until the very air vibrated. It was not a warning, it was a welcome. Halfway across the ice, they saw it, a circle of light pulsing beneath the surface. In it, runes glowed and shifted like living things. Astrid stepped forward, her breath steady. "This is the Gate of Dream," she murmured. "The god's memory of life." She knelt and touched the ice, and instantly the circle flared brighter, flooding their faces with golden light. The ice melted beneath her hand, revealing a smooth pool that rippled inward instead of outward. "Do not fear," she said softly. "We are part of what they remember." Then she stepped forward, and was gone. The others cried out, rushing to the edge, but the pool had already frozen again, seamless, leaving no trace of her. The circle of light began to fade. Some turned to run, others knelt in prayer. But then, the youngest of them, Leif's sister Freya, stepped forward. "She's not gone," she whispered. "She's waiting for us." Her voice trembled, but her eyes shone. "We must finish what she began." One by one, they placed their hands upon the ice. One by one, they vanished into the golden light. By sunset, the village stood empty. Houses still smoked faintly from dying fires. Tools lay abandoned in the snow. The world had gone quiet, except for the faint echo of voices, distant, gentle, like a song carried on the wind. Generations later, travelers from the southern coast would find the ruins of that village. They spoke of strange carvings in the ice, glowing faintly even in daylight. Some said they heard music when they stood very still. Others claimed they dreamed of faces smiling beneath the frozen sea, and once, during a winter solstice, a group of traders camped near the fjord heard a sound unlike any they'd known. Horns, deep and sorrowful, followed by a whisper that seemed to move through the stars themselves. "Dream forward, eyes." From that night onward, they called the place Mamira Sea. But among the skalds, the poets, and keepers of the old songs, there remained one final tale, passed in secret. It said that the people who walked into the Gate of Dream did not perish. They became part of something greater along, unbroken dream shared by gods and mortals alike. In that dream, there were no winters, no wars, no hunger, only endless dawn and the sound of laughter echoing across golden fjords. And if you stood upon that ice, under the right star and the right silence, you might still hear them, the voices of those who dreamed the world awake. The wind would rise softly, brushing your face like the hand of a friend long gone. And from somewhere deep within the mountain, a whisper would follow. "We are not lost. We are remembering." When Freya opened her eyes, she expected darkness, but instead she found herself bathed in a warm, golden glow. The air shimmered around her, heavy with the scent of pine and salt. She stood in a vast meadow that stretched as far as she could see, surrounded by tall mountains that glowed like embers beneath a setting sun. The sky wasn't blue, nor was it night. It was both, an endless twilight that hummed softly, as though the world itself breathed in harmony. She turned and saw the others: Gunnar, old Tor, the weaver Ingrid, and the rest standing silently, blinking in awe. Their breath no longer clouded the air, their furs no longer heavy with frost. The fear that had clung to them on the frozen sea melted away like morning mist. For the first time in months, Freya felt warmth touch her skin. "Are we dead?" Gunnar asked, his deep voice almost afraid to echo. "No," Freya said quietly, though she couldn't explain how she knew. or remembering. In the distance, they saw figures walking across the meadow, tall, graceful, shining faintly like the edge of a blade in moonlight. Some carried spears tipped with starlight. Others bore shields etched with moving runes. One of them approached, his cloak rippling like smoke. His hair was the color of ice, his eyes bright as burning coals. "You have come far," he said, his voice deep and patient. "Few mortals find the gate. Fewer still walk through without losing themselves." Freya stepped forward, her heart steady. "Where are we?" the man smiled. "You are in the place between waking and memory, the realm of dreams that outlived its dreamers. The gods remember through you now." He raised a hand and gestured toward the mountains. As he did, the sky began to shift. Scenes unfolded within the clouds' great halls of gold, ships sailing through the stars, warriors feasting beside rivers of light. The people gasped, for they saw things that had only lived in their songs and prayers. "This," said the stranger, "is what your ancestors dreamed for you. It is the memory of their hope." They walked with him through fields of whispering grass until they reached a river that glowed from within. The water was cool and bright, carrying fragments of light that looked like tiny souls drifting downstream. "Every thought, every prayer, every act of courage leaves an echo," he said. "Even when your bodies fade, the echoes remain." Tor, the eldest among them, knelt by the river and dipped his hand into the light. His eyes filled with tears. "I hear them," he whispered. "The ones we buried. My son, my wife. They're here." The stranger nodded. "All that was loved, all that was lost, lives on here. But only if remembered." They rested there for what felt like hours, though time had lost meaning. The meadow changed colors with every breath, now gold, now silver, now deep blue, like the sea before dawn. In the far distance, a mountain peak split open, revealing a faint pulse of red light. Freya felt a pull toward it, as though her heart recognized something her mind could not. The stranger saw her gaze and said softly, "The heart fire calls to those who still belong to the waking world. It burns where the gods dream of life. You must go there, Freya, for through you others will follow." "But how will I return?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Dreams always find their way back." As she and the others began the long walk toward the heart fire, they passed through forests where the trees hummed softly, their leaves whispering forgotten sagas. Faces appeared in the barks, smiling, weeping, sometimes both. Streams sang in ancient tongues. Once they came upon a bridge woven entirely of light, stretching across an abyss that seemed endless. Freya hesitated, but Gunnar placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Don't look down," he murmured. "The dream only breaks when you doubt it." They crossed safely, the air shimmering beneath their feet like water. On the other side, they found themselves before a vast cavern mouth, its entrance rimmed with flickering runes that changed as they breathed. The light inside pulsed slowly, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Freya felt warmth radiating from within, not the warmth of a fire, but of memory. Every heartbeat, every song her people had ever sung, seemed to vibrate in the stone walls. She turned to the others and said, "If this is the gods' dream, then we are their breath. What we carry back will become their song." And as she stepped into the cavern, the runes blazed brighter, casting light upon a chamber so vast it seemed to hold the stars themselves. In its center stood a single flame, suspended in the air, burning without smoke or fuel. The heart fire. It pulsed gently, as if aware of her presence. When she approached, the flame flared, and in it she saw visions, her village before the frost. Her brother leaf carving runes, Astrid smiling beneath the northern lights. Then the flame spoke not in words, but in feelings, like warmth unfolding within her soul. "You are the bridge," it told her. "Through you, the dream continues." Freya knelt before it, tears glistening on her cheeks. "Then let me remember," she whispered. "Let me carry your light home." And as the flame rose, surrounding her in gold, the last thing she heard was the stranger's voice echoing from beyond the cavern. "The gods do not dream of power. They dream of those who still dare to hope." When the light faded, the cavern was empty once more. Only the soft hum of the heart fire remained, waiting for another dreamer to find it. The first thing Freya felt was the wind. It wasn't the icy whip of the northern sea. This time it was softer. It's filled with the scent of ash and pine, like the breath of an old world awakening. When she opened her eyes, she was no longer inside the glowing cavern. She stood at the edge of a great fjord under a sky of molten gray. The mountains around her rose like silent gods, their peaks hidden by mist. The others were nowhere to be seen. Only the echo of her own heartbeat answered her. For a moment, she wondered if she had imagined it all the meadow of light, the shining stranger, the heart fire that spoke in warmth. But when she placed her hand upon her chest, she felt something burning softly beneath her ribs. The flame was still with her. Down below, the sea crashed against black rocks, relentless as time itself.
Ow.
The wind carried faint whispers, voices woven into the sound of the waves and chant songs sung by souls that had never been buried. Freya closed her eyes and listened. The voices didn't speak in words, they spoke in memories. A child's laughter, a mother's lullaby, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the cry of gulls above a harbor that no longer existed. Each sound was a fragment of the world she once knew, now drifting like smoke. She began to walk along the ridge, her boots crunching against frost and gravel. The light shifted strangely here. The sun and moon shared the same sky, turning the land beneath into a dream suspended between night and day. After some time, she found a small hut made of driftwood and bones, its roof covered in moss. Smoke rose from the chimney, twisting into shapes that reminded her of runes. Inside sat a man wrapped in a cloak of raven feathers. His hair was white as the first snow, and his eyes reflected the sea. He looked at her as though he had been expecting her. "Carry the fire," he said simply. Freya nodded. "I was told it would guide me home." The old man smiled faintly. "Home is a word with many meanings, child. To some, it is where they were born. To others, where they are remembered. For you, it may be where the gods still dream." He gestured for her to sit by the fire. The warmth of it felt different, ancient, alive. "Tell me," he said softly, "what did you see in the heart fire?" Freya hesitated. "I saw my people, my village before the frost. I saw my brother, and I heard the voice of something vast, something that dreams." The old man nodded. "The gods do not live in temples, Freya. They live in stories. Every time a name is spoken, a tale remembered, the gods breathe again. That is why they dream through Yubi, 'cause you remember." He reached into his cloak and drew out a small wooden carving. It was a horse, weathered but carefully made. This belonged to a boy who once dreamed of riding to the end of the world. He never did, but his dream still travels. He placed the carving in her hands. "Carry this with you when the storm returns. It will remind you that every ending is only a pause in the song." Freya thanked him. But before she could ask who he was gone. The hut was empty, the fire cold, as if it had been abandoned centuries ago. Only the carving remained in her palm, warm as if it had a heartbeat of its own. She continued her journey north, following the faint pull of the fire within her. The land grew stranger with each step. The mountains whispered her name in voices that sounded like the dead. Rivers ran with light instead of water. In one valley, she saw statues of warriors half buried in ice, their faces turned toward the horizon as though waiting for a dawn that never came. When night finally fell, if it could be called night, she came upon a circle of stones glowing faintly with frost fire. She knelt beside one and brushed away the snow. Carved into the surface was a name she knew. Leif, her brother. Beneath it, the runes told a story: his last battle, his final words, and the song he sang before the sea took him. Freya's breath caught in her throat. Tears froze against her cheeks. Then the stone shuddered. A faint light seeped from the cracks, and a figure emerged translucent. Made of ice and wind, yet unmistakably her brother. Leif looked at her and smiled, the same boyish grin she'd seen 1,000 times. "You found it," he said, his voice like the echo of a forgotten song. "Leif," she whispered, her voice breaking, "is this real?" He shook his head. "Real enough to remember." They stood there for a long time, saying nothing. Freya wanted to hold him, but her hands passed through his form like mist. "The gods gave us dreams, so that we would never truly lose one another, Leaf said. You must carry ours forward. There are others still trapped in the frost, waiting for your light. The wind howled, carrying the scent of snow and salt. Leaf began to fade, his edges dissolving into the air. Go to the northern gate, he said. The dream will end where the world begins. And then he was gone. Freya fell to her knees, clutching the wooden horse to her chest. The fire within her pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. Above, the sky shimmered with the dance of the aurora green and silver waves moving like living souls. For a moment, she felt her sorrow melt into awe. She realized then that dreams were not escapes. They were bridges between past and present, between gods and mortals, between those who remember and those who are remembered. When dawn came, if dawn it truly was, she rose to her feet, stronger than before. The horizon called her northward, where the sun never fully rose and the stars never fully slept. Somewhere beyond the mountains, the northern gate waited. And with it, they endured the beginning of every Viking dream. The path to the northern gate was unlike any place Freya had ever walked. The air was so still that even her breathing seemed too loud. Snow didn't fall, it drifted sideways, suspended in some strange rhythm between wind and silence. The mountains loomed taller now, their faces carved by the breath of gods. The higher she climbed, the less she felt the pull of the world behind her. The earth seemed to fade, replaced by something older, vast, and waiting. She moved through valleys of frozen rivers that glowed from within, the light flickering like sleeping stars beneath the ice. Once she saw her reflection there, but it wasn't her own face looking back. It was her mother's, then her grandmother's. Then faces she didn't recognize at all, warriors, seers, dreamers, Shay's one bearing traces of her. She realized with a shiver that wasn't from cold that she carried every one of them within her. Every dream her people had ever dared to dream had flowed through blood, through story, through memory down to her. By nightfall, she reached a plain where the snow had melted into black stone. Strange lights rippled across the sky like curtains of fire. The plain was silent, yet she felt something moving beneath her feet, a deep vibration, slow and steady like a heartbeat beneath the world. She followed it until she reached a towering arch carved into the mountain wall. It was impossibly large each pillar, etched with runes that seemed to change when she blinked. This, she knew without question, was the northern gate. The gate was not open. Between its pillars hung a veil of mist, dense and dark, whispering softly. As she stepped closer, the whispers grew clearer voices of those she had known and lost. Her father's laugh, her brother's song, the hushed prayers of her people before a storm. They called her name not in fear but in longing. Freya hesitated. The last time she'd heard voices like this, they'd belonged to dreams. But now they felt heavier rooted, alive. What lies beyond? She whispered. A voice answered not from the mist, but from behind her. Beyond is the memory of all things. But to enter, you must leave behind your name. She turned. The stranger from the meadow stood there again, the one who had first shown her the heart fire. His cloak rippled with light, though his face was calm and mortal now. You cannot pass as Freya the daughter, Freya the dreamer, or Freya the lost, he said. To cross, you must be no one and everyone. She swallowed hard. And if I cannot, then you will remain here forever, dreaming of what might have been. For a long moment, she said nothing. The thought of losing her name, the last thread connecting her to her people, filled her with quiet dread. But she also knew this was why she had come. The gods' dreams were not meant to be kept, they were meant to be carried forward. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and spoke softly. If my name must fade for the dream to live, then let it fade. The mist stirred, rippling outward like water touched by wind. The stranger smiled not with triumph, but with tenderness. Then remember this, he said. The gods dream not of glory, but of those who listen. He lifted his hand and touched her forehead. Light surged through her, and in an instant, everything changed. She was standing in a vast hall, yet it was not made of wood or stone, but of sound and light. Every beam shimmered like frozen song, every column carved from echo. The walls pulsed with slow rhythm, as though the hall itself was alive. Figures filled the space, hundreds, thousands, some human, some divine, some only half-formed like memories not yet remembered. They looked at her as she passed, their eyes filled with recognition. At the far end of the hall stood a throne, empty yet radiant. Around it burned 7 great fires, each a different color: red for courage, blue for wisdom, gold for memory, green for renewal, white for truth, violet for sorrow, and black for silence. Together they pulsed like the beating heart of creation. A voice filled the hall, not one voice, but many, speaking as one. "Child of frost and fire," it said, "you have walked the dream of your people. You have carried their silence, their grief, their hope. Tell us, what do mortals dream of when the world grows dark?" Freya trembled. The question wasn't for knowledge, it was a test of truth. She thought of her people huddled around dim fires, whispering stories of gods who no longer walk the earth. She thought of the sea, the hunger, the endless cold. And she thought of the small moments, the laughter, the songs, the love that refused to die. "They dream," she said softly, "of warmth, of waking to find the light still there, of holding one another when the dark feels endless." For a long moment, the hall was silent. Then the 7 fires blazed higher, intertwining into a single golden flame. "Then the dream still lives," the voices said, "and through you, it will not fade." The light enveloped her completely. It burned not to destroy, but to reveal. She saw visions within it, her village reborn under spring skies, children running where snow once lay, ships sailing beneath banners of new dawns. Her people survived not through God's favor, but through remembering, through dreaming. When the light finally dimmed, Freya found herself standing once again before the northern gate, but now it stood open. The mist was gone. Beyond it stretched a vast horizon of stars and sea, endless and free. The stranger stood beside her once more. "You have seen what few ever do," he said quietly. "Now go and tell the living what the gods once dreamed." Freya looked out across the horizon. Somewhere beyond that sea lay her people, cold, waiting, afraid. She smiled faintly. "Then let them dream with me." She stepped forward, crossing through the gate, carrying the fire of the gods in her heart. And as she vanished into the dawn, the whisper of 1,000 ancestors followed her soft, eternal, like wind over snow. When Freya awoke, she was lying in snow, her fingers buried in frost, her breath rising like smoke into a pale morning sky. The wind was sharp and real again, no longer dream-soft or glowing. She blinked slowly, half expecting the golden horizon to still be there, but she was back in Midgard, the mortal world. The mountains she had crossed in her visions were now cold and silent, their peaks veiled by mist. The warmth of the heart fire still pulsed faintly beneath her ribs, a small reminder that the dream had not been just a dream. It had been a message, a passing of memory from gods to humankind. She rose to her feet, dizzy but steady. The valley below stretched out like an open hand, dotted with the faint outlines of her village. Smoke curled weakly from a few hut signs of life. Freya's chest tightened with emotion. They had survived. Somehow, while she wandered between worlds, her people had held on. She began the long trek back, her boots crunching over ice, her fur cloak stiff with frost. The journey felt different now. The cold no longer bit as deeply. The silence no longer frightened her. She noticed things she had danced before, the way the sunlight caught on the snow and scattered into tiny rainbows. The faint hum of the wind moving between trees, the slow heartbeat of the world itself. Everything was alive, even in stillness. She understood now what the gods had tried to teach her. Winter was not death. It was memory made visible. When she reached the outskirts of the village, the first person to see her was Ingrid, the weaver. The old woman dropped the bundle of firewood she was carrying and cried out her name. Soon others came running, hunters, children, elders all, calling out, laughing, weeping. Freya fell into their arms, half laughing, half sobbing. It felt like coming home after a lifetime away. "Where were you?" Ingrid asked, clutching her hands. "We thought the sea took you. I went where the gods dream," Freya said simply. The people fell silent, unsure if she meant it as a tale or a truth. But in her eyes they saw something beyond words, something shining and endless. Over the following days, Freya told them what she had seen. At night, by the glow of the fire, she spoke of the heart fire that never died. of the stranger who walked between worlds, of her brother's spirit whispering through the snow. She spoke of how the gods no longer waited for temples or sacrifices. They lived instead in remembrance, in courage, in kindness. The children listened wide-eyed, the elders nodding slowly. Some said she had wandered into madness, others said she had walked into myth. But when she held up her hand and opened her palm, they saw a faint flicker of golden light dancing above her skin, a spark that refused to go out. Then they believed. Word of the miracle spread beyond the fjord. Travelers and wanderers began arriving from distant settlements, drawn by stories of a woman who carried fire from the dream of the gods. Some came seeking proof, others hope. Freya welcomed them all. She built a great hall at the edge of the CIA place, not of worship, but of memory. Its walls were carved with runes telling the stories of her people, each one glowing faintly when touched. She called it Brunhall, the Hall of Echoes. There she taught others to remember not with fear, but with gratitude. The gods sleep in the wind, she would say. When we tell our stories, they awaken. Soon. The hall was filled with voices each night, songs of loss and laughter, sagas of courage, whispered prayers for the unborn. It became a sanctuary for every soul who had endured the long winter and still dared to dream. But not all dreams are gentle. As spring thawed the frost, rumors spread of raiders coming from the Eastmen who had lost their own lands to the ice and now sought warmth by the sword. Freya's people were strong but weary. They feared losing what little they had rebuilt. One night, as the wind screamed like a living thing outside, Freya sat before the fire, staring into the golden embers. The warmth pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. "What would you have me do?" she whispered into the flames. For a long moment there was only the crackle of burning wood. Then she heard it, a faint voice, soft as breath. Remember, not all battles are fought with blades. The next morning Freya gathered her people. "The raiders will come," she said, "but we will not meet them with steel. We'll meet them with story." Confusion rippled through the crowd. "When they arrive, we will share our fire with them, our food, our song. The gods gave us warmth not to hoard it, but to spread it." When the raiders finally came, their ships black against the dawn, they found no walls or weapons waiting. Instead, they found a feast prepared meat, roasting, torches burning, and songs echoing from the Hall of Echoes. Their leader, a scarred man named Rurik, approached warily, axe in hand. "Is this a trick?" he demanded. Freya stepped forward, her cloak shimmering faintly with the light of the heart fire. "No trick," she said. "Only a dream, still alive." Something in her voice, calm, steady, ancient, made him pause. He lowered his weapon. That night, warriors and villagers alike shared food, stories, and songs. For the first time in generations, enemies became kin. The hall burned with laughter and light, and when the night ended, Rurik knelt before Freya and said, "You have given us more than warmth. You have given us belonging." She smiled faintly. "Then the gods are still dreaming through us." Years later, long after Freya's hair had turned to silver, she stood at the same ford where she had once awakened. The sea glittered beneath the sun. Children played where the frost had once bitten deep. She closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the heart fire still flickering beneath her ribs. The world would change. The winters would return, but she knew now that every dream, every hope whispered into the dark would one day awaken again. And so the gods continued to dream, not from above, but through the hearts of those who remembered. The years that followed became known in the sagas as the Age of Quiet Fires. Freya's Hall of Echoes turned into more than a gathering place. It became a living heartbeat of memory across the north. Every traveler who left its doors carried a fragment of warmth in their soul, a small spark that would not fade, no matter how far the snow reached. But even as the fires grew, so too did the questions. The younger generation's children born after the endless winter had never seen the world before the frost. To them, the tales of gods and dream realms were legends told to keep fear at bay. They wanted proof, not poetry. They wanted to see the divine with their own eyes. Among them was a young man named Arvid, son of one of the raiders who had stayed behind after that first winter's truce. He had grown up listening to Freya's stories by the firelight. Her voice had shaped his childhood, and her hall had been his classroom. But as he grew older, Doubt crept in like cold through cracked wood. Dreams don't melt the ice, he told her one evening. Songs don't feed the hungry. Freya looked at him with gentle eyes, her face lined like ancient parchment. No, she said, but they remind us why we hunger. Without memory, survival is hollow. Arvid frowned, unsatisfied. The world was changing. Traders from the south spoke of kingdoms rising beyond the mountains lands, where men no longer spoke of gods who slept, but of kings who ruled. The stories of the old ways were fading like embers. One night, driven by a mix of curiosity and frustration, Arvid climbed the northern cliffs above Brunhall. The moon was high, the sea frozen beneath it like hammered silver. There, in the silence, he shouted into the wind, "Where are you, gods of the old world? If you ever spoke to her, speak to me." Only the sea answered, whispering softly. Disappointed, he turned to leave. Then something glimmered faintly on the horizon. A faint gold thread pulsing like the breath of the earth. He felt it tug at him, subtle but undeniable. Without thinking, he began to follow it. For 3 days he walked north past fords, over ridges sharp as dragon spines. The cold bit deep, but the light stayed ahead of him, always just out of reach. On the 4th day, he found himself before a mountain, unlike any other black stone. Sheer and vast, its summit lost in the clouds. The light vanished into a crevice halfway up the slope. Arvid followed. Inside, the air was thick and heavy with the scent of pine and old smoke. The walls shimmered faintly, carved with runes so ancient even Freya had never spoken them. At the center of the cavern was a single pool, its surface still as glass. And in its reflection, Arvid saw not himself but a figure of flame and shadow. "You seek what cannot be seen," the figure said, its voice echoing like thunder underwater. Arvid fell to his knees. "Who are you?" "I am what your people have forgotten. The dream that remembers itself." He wanted to speak, but the words froze in his throat. The figure extended a hand of light, and Arvid felt warmth flood his chest, the same warmth Freya had once described. The heart fire? But this time, it was different. It pulsed with wild, restless energy, like the beating of wings. "Why show yourself to me?" Arvid whispered. "Because the dream must be carried by those who doubt. Faith without question fades. But doubt that still walks forward, that is eternal." When he opened his eyes again, the cavern was empty. The pool was dark, yet deep inside him something glowed faintly. He returned to the village after many days, weak but alive. Freya was waiting. She saw the light behind his eyes and smiled knowingly. "You found them," she said. Arvid nodded slowly. "They were never gone. They were waiting for us to remember again." The people gathered that night, and Arvid spoke for hours, telling them of what he had seen. Of the figure of light, of the lesson he had been given. The hall burned bright with fire and belief, the walls shimmering with unseen energy. It was as though the gods themselves were listening. Years passed, and Arvid became the new keeper of the Hall of Echoes when Freya's strength began to wane. She watched him grow into a leader of quiet courage, a man who understood that faith and doubt were two sides of the same coin. When the time finally came for Freya to walk her last path, she asked to be carried to the sea. The people laid her on a small boat, wrapped in furs, surrounded by candles. As the tide carried her out beneath a sky ablaze with northern lights, she whispered a final blessing. "May your stories never end, even when your voices do." The next morning, when the sun rose, a faint golden line was seen glowing across the water, stretching from horizon to horizon. The villagers called it Freya's Bridge, believing it was the path between dreams and the mortal world. And for centuries after, whenever the nights grew long and the frost returned, sailors would swear they saw her walking upon it, carrying her fire still. Arvid spent the rest of his days keeping the hall alive, taught the children to carve their own stories into the wooden beams, each rune glowing faintly in the firelight. He told them that every word spoken with love was a spark that even if the gods never appeared again, their dreams lived through the hearts that remembered. And when he grew old and his hands began to tremble, he looked up at the aurora in the sky and whispered softly, "Still dreaming, aren't you?" A faint warmth flickered in his chest in reply. And so in the endless rhythm of winter and fire, the stories continued woven into the wind, the snow, the human soul. For the Vikings had learned what even the gods once feared to forget, that dreams once born can never truly die. Long after Arvid's death, the Hall of Echoes still stood, though its wood had darkened with time and its carvings softened by centuries of smoke. The world around it had changed. Kingdoms rose and fell, churches replaced temples, and steel ships began to cross waters that had once terrified sailors. Yet in the far reaches of the northern fjords, where the sun still vanished for months and snow buried the earth, the stories remained alive in whispers. One such whisper reached a young historian named Ingrid Salvson, a woman of quiet determination who had grown up in Bergen listening to her grandfather's tales of the old gods. She had studied Norse mythology in dusty university halls, surrounded by books written by men who believed myths were only echoes of primitive minds. But Ingrid didn't believe that. She thought there was something deeper, something that lived beneath the layers of story and time, something that still breathed. When she first heard of the Hall of Echoes, she thought it was just another folktale, until an old fisherman handed her a small, rune-carved amulet one night at the harbor. "Found it near the cliffs of Brunhall," he said. "Same place they say the gods once walked. Take it, it hums sometimes." The amulet was small, shaped like a flame, and when Ingrid held it in her palm, she swore she could feel a faint vibration, like a heartbeat. It was then that she decided to go north. Her journey took weeks. The farther she went, the thinner the roads became, till she had to trade her car for a sled and her phone for a compass. Locals warned her that the old fjords were cursed, haunted by the sleeping ones. But she pressed on, guided by instinct, and perhaps something more. One night, as the aurora shimmered across the black sky, she camped near the base of a mountain that loomed like a giant's shoulder. The air was still, the silence so deep it pressed against her skin. Then she heard it, faint, melodic, almost human. A song carried by the wind. She followed the sound, her lantern flickering. The snow glowed pale blue under the aurora. Ow! And there, half buried in frost, she saw the ruins, a circle of blackened wood and stone, its shape unmistakable. The Hall of Echoes. Kneeling in the snow, she brushed the ice from a carved beam and found a line of runes, their edges still faintly glowing. Her breath caught. Symbols were old, older than the Viking age, older than any language she knew. She took a photo, but the image came out blurred, as if the runes refused to be captured. That night, she built a small fire inside the ruins, the way she imagined Freya might have done centuries ago. The amulet pulsed gently against her chest. As she stared into the flames, exhaustion took her, and she drifted into a half-dreaming state. She found herself standing in a vast hall, not ruined, but whole. Golden braziers burned along the walls, and tapestries shimmered with scenes of warriors, gods, and travelers. At the far end stood a woman with silver hair, eyes like ice and fire combined. "Freya," Ingrid whispered. The woman smiled faintly. "Names change, but yes, you might call me that." Ingrid's heart pounded. "Is this real?" "Real enough to remember," Freya said. "The world forgets, but the dream remains. You've come because the fire needs a new keeper. I don't understand, you will. Every few centuries, the dream fades. It waits for someone brave enough to listen again. The old songs die if no one sings them, but tonight, you've remembered." Freya stepped forward and touched Ingrid's forehead. The air shimmered, and Ingrid saw flashes Arvid walking through snow, the glowing bridge of light across the sea, the figure of flame in the mountain. Then, just as suddenly, it was gone. When Ingrid woke, the fire was nearly out, but something was different. The air smelled faintly of wildflowers, impossible in that frozen place. The amulet around her neck was warm, and when she lifted it, she saw a faint light swirling inside like a captured ember. In the days that followed, Ingrid began to write. She filled notebooks with what she had seen, what she remembered, and what she felt pulsing in her chest. The words came not from research, but from somewhere older. When she returned to Bergen months later, she published her work, The Songs Beneath the Snow, a living history of Norse dreams. It became a sensation. Readers across the world were drawn not just to the myths, but to the emotion behind them, the idea that dreams could survive centuries, that maybe faith and imagination were not relics, but roots. But not everyone believed. Critics dismissed her as romantic, even delusional. "You've blurred myth and history," one wrote. To which Ingrid simply replied, "Perhaps history was never as clear as we like to think." Years later, when she returned to Brunhall with a small film crew, they found something extraordinary. The ruins of the hall had shifted. The carvings, once buried, now faced outward, gleaming faintly even in daylight. And when one of the crew held a microphone to the wind, a low hum filled the air. Steady, rhythmic, unmistakably human. Some said it was just the wind whistling through stone. Others swore it sounded like voices singing in harmony, ancient, endless, waiting to be heard. Ingrid stood there for a long time, eyes closed, listening. She didn't need to prove it anymore. She just knew. The Vikings hadn't dreamed of gold or conquest in those endless winter nights. They had dreamed of connection to each other, to the land, to the divine whisper that said, even in the coldest silence, they were not alone. And as the aurora rippled across the sky like a curtain of living fire, Ingrid whispered the words Freya had once said long ago. "May your stories never end, even when your voices do." The wind carried her voice down the mountainside, over the frozen fjord and into the night, where it joined the ancient chorus that never truly ceased. In the decades that followed Ingrid Solvsen's mysterious expedition, her book became a touchstone for dreamers, historians, and skeptics alike. The songs Beneath the Snow was studied in universities, debated in documentaries, and quoted in speeches about the power of human memory. But what no one could explain was how her field recordings, those faint hums and low tones captured at the ruins, seemed to shift subtly each time they were played. Some claimed it was an artifact of the wind. Others swore it was a message trying to reach through time. Among those fascinated by her work was Dr. Erik Vang, an archaeologist from Oslo whose passion leaned not toward myth, but measurable truth. He admired Ingrid's courage, but to him, stories without evidence were ghosts beautiful, but untouchable. So when he received a letter, handwritten and unsigned, containing only a map marked with the words, "The second hall awaits," he thought it was a prank. Yet something about the handwriting's lanted, deliberate, old-fashioned haunted him. A month later, curiosity won. He assembled a small research team. Lean, a linguist with a sharp tongue. Bjorn, a geologist with a taste for risk. And Merritt, a young documentarian who wanted to film the entire journey. Together they boarded a small ship and set course for the far northern archipelago's lands barely mapped, where GPS faltered and storms could last for weeks. The voyage was brutal. Winds screamed like living things, and the sea tossed them like toys. Yet one night, under a full moon haloed by frost, they saw it. A stretch of coastline shaped like a dragon's jaw, cliffs glittering with ice crystals. The exact pattern from the map. They made camp inside a narrow fjord, its entrance marked by two towering stones. Strange runes were carved into each, almost completely eroded. Lean traced them with gloved fingers. "These aren't Norse," she said quietly. "They're older. Proto-Germanic, maybe. Could even predate the Viking Age entirely." The next morning, they began to climb. The air thinned, the temperature dropped, and fog coiled through the valleys like breath from the mountain itself. After hours of trudging through waist-deep snow, Bjorn spotted something, a perfect circle of stone pillars half buried in frost. At its center was a slab of black rock, polished smooth. The moment Erik stepped near it, his compass spun wildly. "Magnetite," Bjorn muttered. "But there's something else here. Electromagnetic resonance. Maybe." Lean crouched beside the slab, pulling out her notes. "These markings, they're not just decorative. It's a star chart. But it doesn't match any current sky map." She turned her flashlight upward. The constellations above shimmered faintly through the fog, yet somehow the ones carved on the stone felt as if they belonged to a different age, a different sky. Merritt kept filming silently, her breath clouding in front of the lens. "Do you think this could be connected to Ingrid's site?" she asked. Erik nodded slowly. Freya's hall was the first. Maybe this was the second, the place where their dream began. That night, they built a small fire in the ring's center. The warmth barely held against the cold, but the flames painted the runes in flickering gold. Then, as the wind shifted, a low hum filled the air, just like the recordings Ingrid had captured. It was deeper now, almost a pulse. Lean froze. "Do you hear that?" Bjorn tilted his head. "Could be the wind." "No," Erik said softly. "That's a pattern, a rhythm." He pulled a small recorder from his pack and set it near the slab. The hum grew louder, pulsing in short bursts, 3 long tones. 2 short, 1 long again. It wasn't random, it was language. They listened for nearly an hour before the sound faded back into silence. The group exchanged uneasy glances. Maybe seismic activity, Bjorn offered, though he didn't sound convinced. Rocks vibrating under pressure. But Lean whispered, or maybe it's the earth, remembering how to speak. Later that night, while the others slept, Erik sat alone by the dying fire. Studying the amulet Ingrid had left behind, he had purchased it years ago from a museum auction, though it had been catalogued as a replica. Yet here, under the northern lights, it glowed faintly. He lifted it closer to the fire, and suddenly, a wave of warmth swept through him, soft, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. The hum returned, not through the air this time, but through his bones, and then a voice, gentle, distant, undeniably female. "Why do you dig through dreams, Seeker?" He froze. Who's there? The one who waits between the stories? "You came because you remember what you've forgotten." He tried to speak, but his breath fogged uselessly. The air thickened with light soft gold, like sunlight under the sea. For an instant, he saw shapes in it, warriors resting beneath trees of ice, women weaving glowing threads into the air, faces serene and timeless. Then it was gone. The fire sputtered, and he was alone again. At dawn, Erik told the others. They stared at him, half in awe, half disbelief. "You think the voice was Freya?" Leanne asked. "I don't know," he admitted. "But she called me Seeker, and I can't stop thinking about what that means." Bjorn kicked at the snow. "Maybe it means we've been out here too long." But Lean looked thoughtful. "Maybe it means you're next." Before they could discuss further, a deep rumble shook the mountain. Snow cascaded from the cliffs, echoing like thunder. And as the tremor faded, they realized the slab in the center had split open, revealing a hollow space beneath.
Oh.
Inside was a stone staircase descending into darkness. Erik's heart pounded. "The second hall," he whispered. "It's real." They descended with torches, their breath hanging in the still air. The steps led into a vast cavern whose walls shimmered with faint light. Murals covered every surface, scenes of men and women gazing at stars, of fire spreading across seas, of bridges of gold connecting earth and sky. And at the center stood an altar shaped like a sleeping heart. The air was warm here, impossibly so. The hum returned, gentle, steady, and this time it wasn't frightening. It was beautiful. Merritt lowered her camera, eyes wide. "Hey, do you feel that?" She whispered. "It's alive." And in that moment, Erik understood. The Vikings hadn't worshipped idols or craved conquest in the endless nights. What they dreamed of was continuity, the bond that outlives flesh and time, the song that carries on even when the singers fade. He turned to his team. "This isn't a tomb," he said softly. "It's a heartbeat." And as if in answer, the walls pulsed faintly with golden light. The second hall had awakened. For hours, the team stood in silence before the glowing altar, watching the faint pulse of light that seemed to ripple like breath through the stone. It wasn't bright. It was subtle, alive, almost intimate. Every time the flame within it swelled, the air hummed softly, echoing deep in their chests like a second heartbeat. Lean was the first to speak. "If this is natural," she whispered, "then nature has a soul." Bjorn laughed uneasily, rubbing his gloved hands together. "Maybe it's geothermal energy trapped in quartz."
Oh yeah, magnetic field illusion.
But even as he said it, his voice faltered. The glow didn't flicker like electricity. It throbbed as though listening to them. Erik moved closer to the altar, the amulet still hanging against his chest. The nearer he got, the warmer it became. He reached out a trembling hand and placed it on the stone. The warmth spread through his arm, and suddenly his vision shifted. The cavern vanished. He was standing on a shore at twilight, waves lapping at his boots. The horizon was aglow with ribbons of color, the aurora, alive and breathing. Figures walked beside him, dressed in furs and bronze, faces calm, eyes bright. They didn't speak, but he understood them. Their thoughts brushed his mind like a melody. "You have found what we left behind," one said. "But this is not our resting place. It is your beginning." Erik tried to respond, but his words vanished into the wind. The figure continued, "The dream is not ours alone. Each age must dream its own fire. You are not the first, and you will not be the last." The vision shifted again. He saw Ingrid Solvson, kneeling before the ruins, decades earlier, firelight dancing on her face. He saw Arvid carrying a torch through the snow, and Freya smiling at a sky of endless stars. Then the light faded, and he was back in the hall, his team's voices faintly calling his name. "Erik." Merritt's hand was on his shoulder, shaking him. "We're gone just staring into nothing for minutes." He blinked, breath trembling. "I saw them," he said. "All of them. Arvid, Ingrid, Freya. They were real." Bjorn frowned. "You mean you hallucinated?" "No," Erik said, meeting his gaze. Remembered, the glow of the altar began to fade again, dimming to a steady amber. The air cooled. But the hum so soft they could barely hear it remained constant, like the quiet whisper of a sleeping heart. Lean crouched near the base of the altar, brushing away dust to reveal another set of runes. She traced them slowly. This one says, "To speak with the dream, offer the sound of your truth." She looked up. "What do you think that means?" Erik smiled faintly. "I think it means we stop pretending." He reached into his coat pocket and took out a small recorder, the same one that had captured the hum above ground. He set it on the altar, pressed record, and spoke softly. "My name is Erik Vang. I came here searching for history. I thought I'd find evidence, carbon data, stone. But I think what I've found is something bigger. Proof that belief leaves fingerprints, just like hands do." The air stirred. A faint shimmer passed across the cavern walls. Lean swallowed hard. "I'll say something too." She stepped forward. "My name's Lean Holvik. I've spent my life translating words no one uses anymore. I always thought language was meant to define, but maybe it's meant to connect. Maybe that's what these runes were for." Then Bjorn spoke reluctantly. "Bjornstein, I don't believe in gods or ghosts. But if you can hear us, then I guess I was wrong about something. I don't know what, but something." Merritt, holding her camera, hesitated. "Merritt Olsdatter, came here to film science. But I think I'm filming faith." As the last word echoed through the chamber, the hum deepened. The ground trembled not violently, but rhythmically, as though in response. The walls of the second hall glowed brighter, the runes burning gold. A faint chorus, hundreds of voices rose from the air itself. The team froze, listening. It wasn't language. It was song. The sound built slowly, layer upon layer, until it filled the cavern. Erik felt tears well in his eyes. The melody was familiar, heartbreakingly so. He'd heard it before in Ingrid's recordings, in ancient Norse hymns, in lullabies his grandmother used to hum. It was the same song, passed from voice to voice for centuries. The altar split open with a soft crack. Inside was a hollow recess filled with fine dust and a single stone tablet, smooth as glass. Etched upon it were new runes, freshly carved, glowing faintly.
Ow.
Lean read them aloud, her voice trembling. "When the dream is spoken, the fire remembers. When the truth is shared, the world awakens." Then, just as suddenly as it began, the light dimmed. The cavern fell silent. Only the torchlight flickered. The four of them stood still, hearts racing. Finally, Bjorn let out a shaky laugh. "Well," he said, "if that's not proof of something, I don't know what is." They carried the tablet back to the surface, wrapped carefully in cloth. As they emerged into the frozen dawn, the aurora danced across the sky again, brighter than ever, pulsing in the same rhythm as the hum they'd heard below. Back at camp, Merritt replayed the footage she had recorded inside the second hall. At first, it looked normal dim light, faint echoes. But then, for a single frame, something impossible appeared. A figure standing behind Erik as he spoke to the recorder. A tall woman in ancient armor, her eyes soft, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. Merritt froze the frame. "Erik," she whispered, "you need to see this." He leaned in close, staring at the image. A faint smile curved his lips. "She kept her promise," he said softly. "The dream never dies." They stayed at the site for another week, studying, documenting, and recording everything they could. But when they returned months later with a larger team, the entrance to the second hall was gone. The mountain had shifted. burying it completely beneath tons of rock and ice. All that remained was the tablet, still warm to the touch, its runes glowing softly under the museum lights in Oslo. Visitors said it made the air around it hum faintly, like a sleeping heartbeat. Scientists dismissed it as resonance from nearby machinery. But those who lingered in front of it long enough sometimes swore they could hear faint voices singing softly in a language older than time. And if they closed their eyes, some even claimed they could see a golden bridge stretching into the northern sky, where the lights of the aurora shimmered like the breath of dreaming gods. The Vikings, it seemed, were still dreaming through stone, through story, through every heart willing to listen. Weeks after their return, Oslo was wrapped in its usual rhythm-gray skies, the slow hum of trams and a thin mist over the harbor. Yet for Erik, the city no longer felt like the same place. Every sound seemed hollow, every movement too fast. The mountain had left a hum inside him, faint but constant, like an echo that refused to fade. Sometimes at night, when he closed his eyes, he could still feel the warmth of the altar on his palm and see the faint glow of the runes burning through the dark. The tablet now rested in a glass case inside the Museum of Nordic Antiquities. Behind the velvet ropes, a small plaque read, "Recovered from Northern Norway, 2025. Composition unknown." Estimated to be over 1,000 years old. But there was something missing from that description, something Erik couldn't quite name. The words composition unknown felt too sterile for what he'd seen. This wasn't just a relic, which was a message. Every few days, he visited the museum. He'd stand before the glass case, hands in pockets, staring at the faint light still pulsing through the runes. Most people didn't notice it. They just passed by, glancing once, before moving on. But sometimes, when the crowd was thin and the air was still, Erik could hear it again, that same low hum, deep as the ocean, gentle as breath. One evening, as he stood there, he noticed a small boy staring up at the tablet beside him. The boy couldn't have been older than 10. "It's singing," the boy said suddenly. Erik turned. "You hear it?" The boy nodded. "My mom says I imagine things, but it's real. It sounds like when I'm half asleep and someone hums to me." Erik smiled faintly. "Maybe you're hearing something the rest of us forgot how to." Before he could ask more, the boy's mother called him away. Erik watched them go, a strange ache settling in his chest. Maybe that was the real reason he'd found the halt to remember something ancient in himself. Later that week, he received an email from Leanne. The subject line read, "It's starting again." Inside was a single video file. Erik clicked it open. The footage showed Leanne standing in her small apartment, holding a compass. The needle spun wildly, refusing to settle. "It started last night," she said on camera. "Every metallic object in my house hums if I stand near the tablet replica. Bjorn says it's electromagnetic interference, but I think it's calling us." Within hours, Erik was on a train north. He didn't know what he was expecting, only that something had shifted. The sky over Trondheim was clear when he arrived, the air bitingly cold. Leen met him at the station, looking both exhausted and exhilarated. "You hear it too, don't you?" she asked as they walked toward her car. He nodded. "It hasn't stopped since we left." They drove through the night, following a route that seemed to pull at them rather than guide them. The compass needle never stopped spinning. When dawn broke, the snow-covered fjords glowed faintly gold, and there on the horizon, Erik saw something that made his breath catch, a thin column of light piercing the clouds, shimmering like liquid glass. Leen slowed the car. "That's not sunlight," she whispered. They pulled over near a frozen river. The light came from deep within a ravine, where the ice itself seemed to glow. As they approached on foot, Erik noticed faint outlines beneath the frozen surface shapes, symbols, runes carved directly into the ice. The same language they had found in the second hall. He knelt beside the riverbank and pressed his hand to the ice. It vibrated faintly, a familiar hum rising through his fingers. "It's alive," he murmured. Leen crouched beside him, spreading. They decided to camp near the ravine overnight. As dusk fell, the glow beneath the ice brightened. Shadows danced across the snow. Erik sat by the fire, staring into the shimmering depths. "What if this isn't a place?" he said quietly. "What if it's waking up everywhere?" Lean wrapped her coat tighter. "Did you mean the dream?" He nodded.
Ow.
Ingrid said the dream wasn't theirs alone. Maybe it moves through whoever's willing to listen. Around midnight, Erik woke to a faint whispering sound. At first, he thought it was wind brushing through the trees. But as he listened, he realized it was voices, soft, distant, ancient, looked toward the ravine. The ice was glowing brighter now, the runes pulsing rhythmically. He shook Lean awake. "It's happening." They stood side by side, watching as the light beneath the ice shifted shape, forming circles. Spirals, then a single glowing symbol. Fehu, the rune of beginnings, prosperity, and energy. Leanne exhaled sharply. "That's the first rune of the Viking alphabet." "Yes," Erik said softly. "The start of everything." Without thinking, he began to hum the same melody from the second hall. Slowly, the runes responded, glowing brighter with each note. Leanne joined in, her voice trembling but strong. The air around them shimmered. The ground hummed in unison. Then, for a brief moment, Erik saw them again, the figures from his vision. The ancient ones, standing beneath the aurora, smiling faintly. They weren't gods or ghosts. They were people dreamers like him. Their world had ended long ago, but their hope had found a way to survive. When the light finally faded, the ice was clear. The runes were gone, as if melted into memory. The ravine fell silent. Only the fire crackled softly. Lean looked at him. Did we just witness history repeating itself? Erik shook his head slowly. I think we just joined it. They stayed awake until dawn, speaking little, listening to the faint hum that now filled the valley. It wasn't frightening anymore. It was steady, comforting, like the heartbeat of something vast and alive, sleeping just beneath the surface of the world. As the first light of morning spread across the snow, Erik took out his recorder once more and whispered, "If anyone finds this, don't look for answers, just listen. The dream is not lost. It's waiting." He turned off the recorder and watched as the wind carried their breath into the sky, where the faint glow of the aurora still lingered like a promise. When Erik and Lean returned to Oslo, they were no longer the same people who had left weeks earlier. The snow in the city looked dull compared to the light they'd witnessed in the mountains. Everything seemed muted, voices, colors, even time. Erik found himself walking slower, pausing often to listen to things no one else heard, the hum of power lines, the rhythm of footsteps, the sigh of wind between buildings. Each carried a pattern, a faint echo of something that stretched far beyond human comprehension. The museum, once a sanctuary of history, now felt like a vault of sleeping memories. The tablet still glowed faintly, but museum staff had grown nervous. The curator told Erik that several visitors had complained of hearing whispers when standing too close, and one security guard had quit after claiming he'd seen runes shifting under the glass. Static light reflections, the curator had explained nervously. But perhaps it's best if the exhibit is restricted for now. That night, unable to sleep, Erik returned to the museum. He slipped in using his access card, the echo of his boots carrying through the marble hallways. The glow from the tablet spilled across the floor like moonlight. He stood there for a long time, breathing slowly. Then, in the silence, he whispered, "Why me?" The light brightened, pulsing once. Voice not human, not language resonated in his chest. It wasn't words, but meaning. "You listened." Erik fell to his knees, heart pounding. The voice didn't continue, but the message lingered, expanding in his mind. He realized suddenly that the dream wasn't just the Vikings, it was older. It belonged to the land itself. The ancients had only given it form, music, and myth, but it had always been there waiting for someone who could hear it. Over the next few days, the phenomenon spread. Across Scandinavia, reports flooded in people describing strange lights under frozen lakes, patterns appearing in the snow, metallic humming, and radio frequencies. Scientists scrambled for explanations. Magnetic anomalies, atmospheric interference, hoaxes, but Erik and Lean knew. The dream was waking. They met with Ingrid, who had been quietly following their findings. Her eyes gleamed with a mix of awe and fear. "If what you're saying is true," she said, "then the stories were never metaphor. The sagas about the sleeping north, the voice beneath the ice, they were warnings. Or invitations." Lean leaned forward. "Invitations to what?" Ingrid smiled faintly. "To remember." She pulled out a worn leather book. its pages filled with sketches and runic translations. My grandmother told me once that the old gods never died. They simply withdrew when people stopped listening. Maybe what's happening isn't supernatural at all. Maybe the earth is trying to reconnect through memory through people who still feel wonder. That night, Erik dreamt again. He stood on an endless plain of ice, the aurora rippling above him like waves of green fire. Figures walked toward him, men and women in fur cloaks, carrying torches. One of them, a tall woman with braided silver hair, handed him a horn carved with runes. "Drink," she said, "and remember what you are." He lifted it to his lips. The taste was like cold air and thunder. He looked up again. She was gone. He woke with the taste still in his mouth, his heart racing. On his bedside table, his notebook lay open to a fresh page. Except now, symbols had appeared across it. Not drawn, but burned into the paper. They matched the runes on the horn from his dream. He traced one gently. It was warm. By morning, Lean arrived with news. "The government wants to study the tablet," she said breathlessly. "They're moving it to a secure facility. They think it's dangerous." Erik shook his head. "It's not dangerous, it's misunderstood." But when they reached the museum, soldiers were already loading the artifact into a steel crate. The curator stood by helplessly. Erik tried to protest, but one of the officers warned him to step back. "Orders from above," he said flatly. "There have been ... disturbances." That night, Oslo experienced a blackout. Every light in the city flickered and died. Only one glow remained, the faint blue radiance from the north, visible even through the clouds. People stepped out of their homes to watch as the aurora twisted violently overhead, forming patterns too deliberate to be natural. Phones recorded it. News anchors described it as the most intense geomagnetic storm in decades. But Erik and Lean stood on a rooftop, watching the sky spell something neither of them could deny, runes, glowing like fire across the heavens. "They're not storms," Erik whispered. "They're messages." For the next several days, the northern skies danced ceaselessly. Across Norway, Sweden, Iceland, even parts of Canada, witnesses reported the same humming tone beneath the aurora, a frequency that resonated deep inside the body. Religious leaders called it divine. Scientists called it unknown. But for those who could feel it, it was something far simpler, a call to remember. Lean began recording frequencies from the phenomenon, analyzing the hum's waveforms. "It's like a code," she said, repeating patterns, almost ... musical. "Can you decode it?" "Maybe," she murmured, eyes bright with fatigue and awe. "But I think it's less about understanding and more about feeling. Like a story you don't read, do live it." Erik stared at her, realizing she was right. The ancients hadn't written their wisdom in books or scrolls. They had sung it into stone, air, and blood. That was why only those who listened could awaken it. One night, as they reviewed data, the tone changed. It became rhythmic, like a heartbeat. "That's not random," she whispered. "It's responding to us." The lights outside pulsed in sync with the rhythm. Their equipment spiked with readings off every scale. Erik grabbed his recorder. "This isn't just history," he said, breathless. "This is contact." And as the hum deepened, he felt it again, the weight of generations, the silent strength of mountains, and the endless patience of those who had dreamed beneath the ice. The Vikings hadn't worshipped gods out of fear. They'd honored memory itself, knowing that what we forget, the earth remembers. When the hum faded, they sat in silence, tears streaming down their faces, without knowing why. Lean whispered, "Do you think they're still here?" Erik smiled faintly. "Not here," he said. "Everywhere." Outside, snow began to fall, slow, almost deliberate. The city slept beneath a sky of shifting color, unaware that the ancient dream had already awakened in its heart. The morning after the blackout, Oslo awoke to a city both ordinary and changed. A power returned, but the sky retained a faint green shimmer, even under daylight. People whispered in cafes about strange dreams. They'd had dreams of longboats, mountains, and songs in languages they didn't know. News outlets called it the Aurora Syndrome, a psychological reaction to the storm. But Erik knew better. The dream had slipped into the waking world. He and Leanne met at her apartment, where the walls were now covered with runic sketches and waveform charts. She looked exhausted, but alive in a way Erik hadn't seen before. "It's happening faster than we thought," she said. tapping a graph. The resonance patterns are spreading. They re strongest near ancient Viking sites, but we re picking up echoes as far south as Germany. Erik leaned over her shoulder, studying the readouts. It's like the entire continent is remembering something. Leah nodded. And it's not just Europe. I've been getting messages from researchers in Canada and Greenland. Same tones, same light patterns. That night, as they reviewed the data, the lights flickered again. The hum returned lower. This time, almost sorrowful. Lean turned to him. It's changing. It's not just awakening. It's morning. The next few days blurred together in a haze of sleepless study and mounting global curiosity. Scientists held emergency conferences. Social media exploded with videos of shimmering skies and magnetic anomalies. Some people claimed miracle-sick relatives suddenly recovering, lost pets returning home. Others warned of danger, calling it the Earth's fever, but Erik and Lean kept listening. The hum grew softer, slower, as though it was fading away. It's dying, Lean whispered one night. Whatever's speaking to us it's losing strength. Erik frowned. Or maybe it's waiting for us to respond. They decided to return north back to the ravine where the light first rose from the ice. The journey took 3 days. As they drove, the roads were eerily empty. Snow fell steadily, thick and heavy. At night, they camped under the faint glow of the aurora, its colors now pale and tired like the last breath of a dream. When they reached the ravine, it looked almost ordinary. The ice no longer glowed. The air was still. But Erik felt the hum beneath his feet. Faint but insistent. It's still here, he said, just weaker. They unpacked their equipment recorders, sensors, and the replica tablet Lean had built from their earlier findings. She placed it on the ground near the river, then adjusted her frequency transmitter. If this thing really responds to resonance, she said, then maybe it needs our voice again. Erik nodded. Together, they began to hum. The melody that had once awakened the mountain flowed through the cold air soft, slow, reverent. At first, nothing happened. Then beneath the ice, faint lights began to stir tiny points, glowing like stars trapped in frozen glass. Lean's voice trembled, but she kept singing. Erik joined her, and as their tones merged, the air vibrated. The lights brightened, swirling into patterns. And then, faintly, a chorus rose from below ancient, deep, filled with both sorrow and peace. It wasn't words, but emotion, longing, remembrance, forgiveness. Erik's knees buckled. He saw flashes again. Warriors laying down their swords, mothers singing to their children by firelight, ships drifting across seas of mist. Not myths' memories. The dream wasn't of conquest or glory. It was of connection between people, land, and time. When the music faded, the ice cracked open slightly, revealing a pool of still water beneath. In its reflection, Erik saw not his own face, but the tall woman from his earlier dream, the one who had handed him the horn. She spoke without sound. You remembered? He reached toward the reflection, and for an instant, the air shimmered. When he looked again, she was gone. The water was calm. The glow had vanished. But in his chest, something new had taken root, a deep peace, like the closing of a long-forgotten story. Lean sank beside him, tears on her cheeks. Did you see her? She whispered. He nodded slowly. Yes, she said. We remembered. They sat in silence, the only sound the wind over the snow. Lean finally said, maybe that's all they ever wanted, to be remembered. Erik looked toward the horizon, where dawn was breaking. And maybe that's what dreaming really means, not escaping the world, but staying awake to what it's trying to tell us. When they returned to Oslo, they found the news had shifted. The aurora had faded. The anomalies had stopped. Scientists declared the phenomenon over. The world moved on. But those who had listened, those who had felt the hum, knew something had changed. People began leaving offerings at ancient sites, flowers, carved stones, notes that read, "We remember." Months later, Erik received a letter postmarked from a remote village in Iceland. Inside was a single sentence written in runes. It translated to, "The dream continues where hearts are quiet." He folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his journal. Then he walked down to the Oslo harbor. The sky was gray, the sea restless. But as he stood there, he could feel it again, the faintest vibration in the air, like a heartbeat beneath the earth. The dream wasn't gone. It had simply found new dreamers. Erik smiled softly and whispered, "We're still listening." The wind carried his words out to sea, across waters the Vikings once sailed, toward the endless north where night and light meet. And somewhere beyond sight, beneath mountains older than memory, something vast and kind stirred just enough to whisper back. Spring came late that year, hesitant and gray, as though the world itself was unsure how to begin again after such a long silence. Oslo's harbor thawed slowly, the ships creaking against melting ice, gulls returning in uneven cries. Erik spent his days teaching again at the university, but the lectures felt hollow. His students listened, but their eyes drifted past him, their attention snagged by the same quiet hum that still lingered in the air inaudible to most, yet undeniably present. He often found himself walking beyond the city, following the call of the forests. Each time, it led him somewhere new. A moss-covered stone with faint carvings, forgotten burial mound, an old oak tree whose roots hummed faintly when touched. It was as if the land itself had awakened, whispering softly through the soil, and Erik more than anyone was meant to hear it. One afternoon, while cataloging field recordings from their journey, Erik discovered something strange. Every hum, every frequency they'd captured from the tablet and the ice, formed a perfect sequence when layered together. It wasn't random. It was a pattern in ancient rhythm repeating itself through time. He played the combined recording through his speakers, and as the tones filled the room, his walls began to vibrate softly. The hum aligned with the rhythm of his heartbeat. For a brief moment, everything ear, sound, thought moved as one. Then there was a knock at his door. It was lean, pale, and breathless. "You need to see this," she said, holding up her tablet. On the screen was a live news feed from a remote area in Greenland. A team of researchers had detected a new anomaly, a vast circular structure beneath the ice, far larger than any natural formation. "They're calling it the Eye of the North," she said. "Satellite images show it's glowing." Erik stared, the same chill from the mountains creeping back into his bones. "It's the same pattern," he whispered. "The one from our recordings." They wasted no time. Within days, they were on a flight to Nuuk, the capital of Greenland. From there, a helicopter carried them over endless white plains, until the ice below began to shimmer faintly blue. The pilot pointed ahead. "That's it. We'll have 10 minutes on the ground before the storm moves in." The moment Erik stepped out, the wind hit him like a wall. Yet beneath the howling, he heard it again, the hum, deeper and slower than before. It pulsed through the air like a living thing. As they approached the glowing circle, Erik saw that it wasn't light at all, it was movement. The ice was shifting in hypnotic waves, each motion rippling outward from a dark center. Lean's instruments went wild. "It's not heat," she shouted over the wind. "It's resonance. The ice is vibrating." Erik knelt, pressing his gloved hand to the frozen surface. The vibration traveled through his arm, into his chest, settling in his heart like a second pulse. And then, faintly, a voice formed, not outside but inside his mind. "The dream is not over." He looked up sharply. "Did you hear that?" Lean frowned. "Hear what?" The voice. She shook her head. "I just feel the vibration." He realized then that whatever this was, it wasn't communicating through words, it was using memory. The hum wasn't a sound. It was a carrier of thought, a bridge between what had been and what could be. The Vikings hadn't worshipped it, they had lived in tune with it. The storm rolled in fast. Snow whipped across the ice, erasing everything but the glow. They were forced to retreat, boarding the helicopter as the pilot shouted warnings. Through the window, Erik watched as the circle of light expanded slowly, like a heartbeat beneath the earth. Back in Nuuk, the world was already reacting. Satellite feeds showed similar energy signatures appearing in scattered regions northern Canada, Siberia, the Scottish Highlands. The pattern was global now. The earth was singing. In the days that followed, chaos mingled with awe. Some called it prophecy, others apocalypse. But Erik felt neither. For him it was awakening. He began writing again his old notebooks filled with sketches, translations, and reflections on the Viking dream. Yet as he wrote, the words came faster than thought, as if guided by an unseen hand. Lean noticed it too. "You're not just documenting," she said. "You're remembering." He smiled faintly. "Maybe it's both." Weeks passed. Across the north, strange phenomena multiplied: ice that glowed faintly at midnight, rivers that hummed when the wind was still, forests where the snow melted in perfect circles. Governments sent scientists. The faithful sent prayers. And yet, no one could explain the purpose. Then, one night, while reviewing a sound frequency from Greenland, Lean froze. "Erik," she whispered, "this pattern, it's Morse code." He leaned closer. "What does it say?" She played it again, slowing it down. Between the hums, faint pauses formed distinct intervals. When translated, the message was chillingly simple. "Remember the warmth." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Erik finally said, "The dream isn't about power or mystery. It's about what we've lost." Leon nodded. "Connection. Balance. The warmth that keeps us human, even in the cold." In the following weeks, the phenomena began to fade, just as suddenly as it had come. The glowing sights dimmed, the hums quieted. But people everywhere seemed changed. Neighbors greeted each other more often. Strangers helped shovel snow. A gentle awareness lingered, a shared, unspoken understanding that something vast had touched them. Erik visited the museum one last time. The original tablet, still in its glass case, no longer glowed. But when he stood before it, he could still feel the pulse deep inside him, steady and calm. He placed his hand against the glass and whispered, "We remembered." And in that moment, though the hall was silent, he could swear he felt a faint warmth beneath his palm, an ancient acknowledgement, quiet and kind, like a smile across time. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft, patient, eternal. The world did not return to normal, it simply found a new rhythm. Months passed since the last hum faded from Greenland, and yet everywhere Erik went, he felt its echo living quietly beneath the surface of life. In Norway, fishermen began speaking of the sleeping sea, days when the ocean went completely still, its waves holding their breath, as if listening. In Canada, trappers told stories of seeing shimmering lights dancing within frozen rivers. And in Siberia, herders claimed that their reindeer grew restless at night, their eyes reflecting pale gold when the wind turned north. The governments called it post-resonance phenomena, a residual effect of unknown origin, but Erik knew better. This was no residue, it was a heartbeat. The world had remembered something ancient, and though it slept now, it would not stay quiet forever. He had settled into a cabin in Tromsk, overlooking the dark, endless fjords. The university had offered him a permanent research position, but he declined. "There are lessons you can't learn from a desk," he'd told them. So he taught his few remaining students through stories instead, old Viking myths, but told differently. One night after class, one of the students lingered behind. Her name was Ingrid, a quiet young woman with an inquisitive mind. "Professor," she said softly, "my grandmother used to tell stories about the earth singing in winter. She said that if you listened closely enough, you could hear it hum beneath the ice. Is that real?" Erik smiled faintly. "Once, I would have said no. Now, I think it's as real as we choose to make it." She nodded thoughtfully. "Then maybe that's what stories are, ways the earth reminds us what's still true." Her words stayed with him. As the nights grew longer, Erik found himself writing again, not research, but reflection. He wrote about the Vikings' winter dreams, not as superstition, but as a map to something the modern world had lost. They had not dreamed of conquest or glory, as the sagas claimed. They had dreamed of remembrance, a return to harmony between fire and frost, man and nature, sleep and awakening. He began collecting fragments of those dreams. Old Norse poems, half-forgotten prayers, songs once sung to the northern lights. One verse struck him deeply. "When the snow devours the sun and hearts grow cold, the dreamers shall wake, their breath of gold. Through silence they'll speak, through stillness they'll rise, to teach the blind stars how to open their eyes." He didn't know what it meant, but it stirred something in him. Then one evening, while sorting through old sound files, he found an unlabeled recording from their Greenland trip. Curious, he played it. At first, only static, then faintly voices. Dozens of them, murmuring in unison. The words weren't in any modern tongue, but Erik understood their feeling: sorrow, hope, and the ache of waiting. He enhanced the audio, isolating one distinct phrase repeated again and again. He recognized two words, High Merender, the world returns. He sat back, heart pounding. Wasn't random interference. It was deliberate, a message carried through the Earth's vibration, perhaps for centuries. That night, the northern lights blazed brighter than ever before. Curtains of emerald and violet rippled across the sky, painting his cabin in ghostly light. Drawn outside, Erik stood beneath them, breath turning to mist. The aurora shimmered, and for a fleeting moment, he saw shapes moving within its shadows of figures in fur cloaks and bronze helms, their faces solemn yet peaceful. They weren't gods or ghosts. They were dreamers, those who had kept the memory alive through generations of winter nights. The vision faded, leaving him trembling. He whispered into the wind, "Why me? Why now?" The answer came not as sound, but as feeling, because you still listen. The following weeks blurred into quiet purpose. Erik began transcribing his findings into a manuscript titled, The Dream That Binds the North. It wasn't meant as science or mythology, but as a bridge between them. He wrote of resonance, memory, and the hum beneath the ice. He wrote of how the Vikings dreamed, not of power, but of peace. Lean visited him one last time in March. She'd left fieldwork behind, focusing instead on humanitarian projects across the Arctic. When she arrived, the fjord was still frozen, the world draped in twilight blue. "You've changed," she said after dinner, watching him by the fire. "There's a calm in you now," he smiled. "Maybe I just stopped fighting the silence." She handed him an envelope. "A publisher in Stockholm wants your manuscript. They think it's something special." He hesitated. "It's not meant to be read by everyone." Lean raised an eyebrow. "Then why write it?" He looked into the fire. "'Cause the dream isn't mine to keep." The night deepened. They spoke little after that, content to let the crackling logs fill the silence. When Leanne finally left the next morning, Erik stood by the shore, watching her figure disappear into the mist. The hum was faint that day, almost tender, like a goodbye whispered through time. Weeks passed. Spring approached once more. The fjord thawed. Birds returned, and with them came something unexpected people. Travelers from across the world began arriving in Tromsk, drawn by rumors of the whispering ice. Some sought proof, others simply peace. They hiked to the old glacier valleys, sat in silence, and listened. And sometimes, just sometimes, they claimed to hear it. A faint, rhythmic hum beneath the ground, as if the earth were breathing with them. Erik never tried to prove or disprove it again. He simply smiled when they told their stories. After all, that was what the Vikings had done, shared dreams beneath endless winter skies, until the dreams themselves became truth. One evening, standing on the shore, he looked west toward the sinking sun. The light broke across the ice like molten gold. For the first time in years, he didn't feel small beneath the vastness of the north. He felt belonging. The hum rose softly in his chest again, and this time he didn't resist it. He closed his eyes and whispered, "I hear you." Somewhere deep within the earth, the answer came not in words, but in warmth. And the mountains, far and silent, seemed to sigh in relief. Spring in the north always came shyly, as if unsure it was welcome. The ice loosened its grip on the fjords, rivers began to murmur again, and the nights, once endless, now retreated inch by inch before a fragile dawn. Yet for Erik, the change in season brought more than warmth. It carried a weight of understanding. For years, he had searched for proof of what the Vikings had dreamed, hoping to translate myth into science. But now, standing on the threshold between seasons, he understood the truth. Their dreams were never meant to be decoded. They were meant to be lived. One morning, Erik awoke to find a small group gathered outside his cabin. Travelers, 3 men and 2 women, each carrying notebooks and recording gear. They had read about him in a feature article called The Man Who Listens to the Earth, the youngest of them. A documentary filmmaker from Colorado named Mia stepped forward. "Professor Thorson," she said, "we came to ask if you'd let us record the hum. People online are calling it the Song of the North. We want to document it before it fades." Erik smiled faintly. "You think it's fading?" She hesitated. "Isn't it?" He looked toward the horizon where the mountains slept beneath thin mist. "The song doesn't fade. Just stop listening." Still, he agreed to help. That evening, they trekked together up into the hills where the rock was old enough to remember the sea. The group set up their equipment's sensitive microphones, vibration sensors, and low-frequency recorders. The air grew colder as the sun dipped. For hours, there was nothing but silence, the kind that seems to stretch forever. Then, just past midnight, Mia gasped softly. "Do you hear that?" At first, it was faint, a pulse beneath the snow, a rhythm older than any heartbeat. It grew stronger, a deep, resonant thrum that seemed to rise through the soles of their boots and into their bones. None of them spoke. They just stood there, shivering as the ground itself seemed to breathe. Mia began to cry quietly. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's like the earth is alive." Erik placed a hand on the icy ground. It always has been. They recorded for hours, until the hum faded with the dawn. When they returned to the cabin, none of them felt the need for words. They sat by the fire, lost in the strange peace that follows revelation. Over the following weeks, the group became his unexpected companions. They helped Erik document stories from nearby villages, fishermen, hunters, and old Sami elders who spoke of the same hum as if it were a neighbor who had returned after a long absence. Each tale was different, yet somehow the same, a sound that came not from the world, but with it. One elder, eyes bright with age, told them, "It's not a song for us to understand. It's a song for us to remember." When Mia finished editing her film, she asked Erik for one final interview. The camera faced him, a single lamp lighting his worn face. She asked, "What do you think the Vikings really dreamed of during those endless winter nights?" Erik looked down for a moment, then into the lens. "They dreamed of this. You're us finally learning to listen again. They dreamed that one day humanity would stop shouting long enough to hear the earth whisper back." The documentary went viral within weeks. It was called The Hum Beneath the Ice. Millions watched in awe. Their screens filled with haunting images of auroras and snow-clad mountains pulsing to a sound deeper than music. Some viewers dismissed it as geological vibration. Others swore it was proof of consciousness within the planet itself. But to Erik, none of that mattered. What mattered was that people heard. Letters began arriving at his cabin. Thousands of them. From school children in Texas, monks in Tibet, artists in France, farmers in Nebraska. They all spoke of the same thing: stillness and a yearning to reconnect. One line appeared again and again. I closed my eyes and thought I could hear it too. Erik smiled whenever he read those words. It meant the dream was spreading. One evening, as twilight painted the sky, he walked down to the water's edge. The fjord reflected the dying light in hues of blue and silver. Somewhere behind him, the door to his cabin creaked open. It was Ingrid, his former student, now an anthropologist herself. "You've started something," she said softly. "People are changing," Erik chuckled. "I didn't start anything. The mountains did." She stepped beside him. Still, they needed someone to translate. For a long moment, they watched the water. Then Ingrid whispered, "Do you ever wonder what happens when the dream ends?" Erik turned to her, eyes calm. "The dream doesn't end, Ingrid. It becomes the world." That night, the sky shimmered with faint auroras, not the blazing green ribbons of old, but soft silken streams of light as if the heavens themselves had grown content. Erik watched them from his porch, the hum gentle in the background, steady as breath. He knew the end was near, not of life, but of searching. For the first time, he felt the Vikings' truth in his bones, that peace is not the absence of struggle, but the surrender to rhythm. The following morning, he packed a small satchel and began walking toward the northern trail, where the last of the ice clung stubbornly to the cliffs. He didn't say where he was going. He didn't need to. The dream would guide him now. Days later, hikers reported seeing a lone figure standing at the mountain's edge at dusk, facing the horizon, motionless. When they reached the spot, he was going to butt the snow beneath his boots was warm. And faintly, so faintly that it could have been the wind, they heard it, the hum, rising once more from the heart of the earth. It was softer now, more human, as if the planet itself were sighing in contentment. The dream had found its voice again. This time it would not be forgotten. The snow fell differently that year. Not in sheets or storms, but in single, deliberate flakes. each one descending like a word from a language the world was just beginning to remember. The mountains seemed quieter too, less like stone, more like thought. Those who lived near the northern fjords began speaking of strange dreams, a great golden hall beyond the sea, filled with laughter, music, and light. They said they could smell salt and smoke and feel the warmth of fires that never went out. Some claimed to see a man standing at the shore, smiling, his hand raised in farewell. No one knew his name, though in every dream he looked the same worn face, bright eyes, calm as the horizon. They simply called him the Listener. Mia returned to that place once more. Years after her documentary had reshaped how the world viewed silence. She was older now, wiser, but still carried the same small recorder that had first captured the hum beneath the ice. She had come alone, seeking closure or maybe just understanding. When she reached Erik's old cabin, the door hung open, snow piled neatly against the threshold as if untouched for seasons. Inside, the air felt warm despite the chill. His journal sat on the table, its pages weathered yet open to the last entry. It read, "The hum is no longer outside. It moves through me now. When I breathe, the mountain breathes. When I sleep, the dream continues. If I vanish, it will not be disappearance, it will be returning." Mia closed the book and stepped outside. The wind was still, the kind of stillness that holds meaning. She took a deep breath and pressed record. This, she whispered, is what he heard. At first, there was nothing, just the faint hiss of air. But then, slowly, the sound emerged. Not the heavy, resonant hum they had recorded years ago, but something lighter, melodic. It carried over the snow, soft and patient, as though the earth itself was exhaling a memory. She looked toward the mountains and saw the aurora rise, not green, but gold and white, like light reflected through honey. The hum swelled until it filled her chest. Her eyes watered, not from the cold, but from the understanding that settled deep within her bones. The Vikings had not dreamed of gods, or conquest, or even Valhalla. When we dreamed of... What they longed for was connection. To land, to spirit, to one another. They had endured endless winter nights not because they sought glory, but because they believed dawn would come if they kept dreaming together. In that realization, Mia understood why Erik had gone into the mountains. He hadn't been searching for proof. He had become part of the dream itself. The hum was his heartbeat now, echoing through stone and sky. She turned off her recorder, placed it gently on the snow, and whispered, "Thank you." Then she began the long walk back, toward the coast. The world changed quietly in the years that followed. Across continents, people began gathering once each winter to listen not to music or words, but to silence. They called it the Night of Stillness. At first, only a few hundred joined in, mostly those who had watched the hum beneath the ice. Then thousands, then millions. Cities dimmed their lights for an hour, power plants slowed their output, airplanes paused in flight paths. The hum returned stronger each year, now recorded even in places far from the Arctic deserts, forests, even deep beneath the oceans. Scientists debated, philosophers wrote, and poets simply smiled. And though no one could prove its origin, people everywhere claimed it changed them. Tempers softened. Old feuds faded. For the first time in generations, the world began to listen, not just to itself, but to everything. One evening, Mia stood on a stage in Oslo, accepting an award for her film's impact on global consciousness. She looked out over the crowd, took a deep breath, and said, "We used to think the Vikings dreamed of gods, but maybe they dreamed of us learning at last how to live with the quiet." When she left the stage, she didn't go to the after-party. Instead, she walked alone down to the harbor, where the sky glowed faintly with northern light. She pressed her hand against the icy water. The hum was there, steady, eternal. Somewhere out in the distance, beyond sound and sea, Erik's voice joined it. And for the first time since the dawn of the world, the dream felt complete. Because perhaps what the Vikings dreamed of during those endless winter nights was not escape, nor conquest, nor survival. They dreamed of awakening, dreamed of a time when humankind would no longer see itself as separate from the world, but as part of its breathing, pulsing story. A time when silence would no longer frighten us, but remind us of who we truly are. And maybe, just maybe, that time had finally come.